If you want to draw more efficiently, then you need to find a human being in a weird position on a bicycle. Hi everyone, I'm Mike, and today I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks on how to draw more efficiently. And although the first statement I made about having a person on a bicycle in a weird position sounded a little odd, there's actually a serious point behind it. Because drawing people accurately is one of the more difficult things to do in art, because we're so conditioned to looking at each other and seeing, just making judgments of people's character and the way they move and so on. And drawing mechanical things like bicycles is also pretty difficult as well, because you've got a lot of circles, a lot of very regular and symmetrical shapes and structures. So combining those two things when the person is in an odd position is perhaps one of the more difficult things to do. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be a man on a bicycle. It could be somebody pushing a lawnmower. It could be somebody jumping out of an airplane, hanging onto a parachute. It could be somebody, with a tennis racket. As long as there's a human element and a manufactured element to it, then it's going to be a pretty difficult subject to draw. And ideally, those two things need to be interacting. So why is this valuable for drawing efficiently? Well, if you take a very complex subject, then the best way to draw efficiently with it is just to simplify as much as possible and draw the minimum amount. So for example, you can see I'm using a Sharpie marker pen here, which I'll come to in a moment. And to draw the wheels, I really haven't worried about the hubs or the spokes or the rims. I've really just treated the wheels as two ellipses, very little detail. Similarly with the bicycle frame, I haven't really drawn that much of it. So the bits of the frame which are showing through the rear wheel in the photo, I haven't bothered to include those at all. And the same for the part of the forks of the front wheel of the bicycle which are showing through the front wheel. I haven't included those either. Now the Sharpie marker is super valuable for learning to draw efficiently, because once you put that mark down, you can't remove it. So it's a really good way to make you think about every mark that you make. And it's also a good way to kind of practice making mistakes. So what I mean by that is, once you've made a mistake with a Sharpie, because you can't cover it up, you have to think, well, what lines could I add here or there to try and cover up that mistake or adapt the mistake into my drawing? Another good tip is to work on a fairly small scale like I am here. This is A4 mixed media paper. So the paper is only around about 11 inches by 8 inches. And the Sharpie marker has a relatively broad tip for that scale. So again, it stops you getting too fiddly. So you're kind of forced to do things as simply as possible for the most part. So if we go back to the bicycle for the moment, if you look at the seat of the bicycle, you can see I've summed that up really with just a curved line for the rear edge of the seat, and then a little V shape for the front of the seat. And that's it, that's all that's there. And then I can allow the viewer's brain to kind of fill in the blanks, fill in the gaps between the lines. Now, when it comes to the hands on the grips of the bicycle, you can see I've just copied the silhouette of those. I haven't tried to include any fingers at all. And then when it comes to the top part of the legs, which I'm drawing now, I haven't drawn them as individual legs, simply as one block of upper leg. Next key tip is you don't have to copy the drawing exactly. So you can see the angle of the lower legs that I'm putting in is different to what's in the drawing, in the photo rather. But you can just be inspired by the drawing. Sorry, I did that again. Inspired by the reference and adapt it to what you want to do in the drawing. So you can see the torso in my drawing doesn't really match the build of the rider in the reference, or the way the cloth of the shirt is hanging, but it doesn't matter too much. The next thing to do is look for cast shadows. So when you're going for your reference, when you're choosing which reference to work from, if you can, when you're trying this exercise, I would pick one where the subject is strongly lit from one side. So you've got strong cast shadows. And that's going to allow you to suggest form by copying the shapes of those cast shadows and how they fall over the surface of your subject, it's going to allow you to create a sense of 3 dimensions with relatively few marks. Similarly, the inclusion of the cast shadow from the bicycle on the ground anchors the bicycle to the ground, so it's just not floating in the space of the paper. Again, I don't need to copy exactly all the details of the shadow. I just want to include enough to suggest that light's coming in from the left. A little horizon line also helps place the rider in an environment. And to be honest with you, I probably should have left this sketch around about here. And you can see I'm sort of pondering where to put my little signature, and I put the signature there. I've probably done enough there. But I couldn't resist fiddling, so that's my next tip. If you want to draw efficiently, resist fiddling, okay? So what I actually did was come in and enhance the cast shadow a little more. I don't feel it particularly spoiled the drawing, but I just think it was perhaps a little unnecessary. So I kind of broke my own previous rule. You know, I was sort of trying to add a little more detail to the cast shadow, which I don't feel was particularly necessary. Now, having used the Sharpie, which encourages us to be calm and considered and go fairly slow, my next recommendation would be to try something else. So here's another bicycle move, another weird position of the rider on the bicycle. And this time, though, I'm going to use a brush and acrylic paint and work on a larger scale. So my next tip is to paint efficiently. You want to relinquish a little bit of control. So notice I'm holding the handle of the brush quite away from the bristles. And that's important because it encourages a more sweeping mark. And it also means you've got less control. So it encourages you to think, okay, I want to minimize mistakes here. So to draw efficiently, I just want to make as few marks as possible. And I want to be free and flowing and consider what I'm going to do beforehand and then just kind of commit to each mark. So you can see I've started to very loosely but reasonably efficiently put in the lines of the person here. And again, the brush isn't going to allow me to go into detail without getting fiddly. So I just have to kind of go for it, but stay calm and put in the key shapes that I spot. So I don't need to connect every dot, and I don't need to connect every bit of the bike and every bit of the person. Okay, so I've just used a flat line there for the seat of the bicycle, put in another wheel. An indication of a cast shadow shows you that that rear wheel is off the ground. And we've got a sense of movement there. And, you know, you can just about see what's going on. So I'm trying out a couple of sort of, not speed lines, I guess, but movement lines coming off of the back wheel. And for a first attempt, that's not too bad. Probably my favourite bit is that I've left out the arm that is on our right, so you can leave bits out of these things. But then my next tip is, because these are quick drawings and we're working efficiently, learn from what you've just done and give it another go. So this time I decided to start with the rear wheel and didn't complete the circle of the rear wheel, but added those motion lines in. Next, I drew in the rear triangle of the frame, which I've made a bit too long, put a little flat line in for the seat, and then just a simple indication of the cranks and pedals. So last time I started with the person. This time I'm starting from the other end of the drawing. So that's another key tip. If you're trying to work out the most efficient way of doing things, experiment with working from, for example, top to bottom, or from left to right, or from man to machine, or from machine to man, depending on what you're drawing. So again, trying to indicate just the key shapes. So the bottom hem of the shorts or somebody's trousers, or the cuff of the sleeve. If you just indicate that shape, it's a great way to create the sense of a cylinder, a cylindrical limb, and it also shows, the shape of the clothing that the person's wearing very efficiently. Now you can see the shape of that front wheel is a little bit dodgy, to say the least, and it's too big compared to the rear wheel. But as these are quick studies, it's worth persevering, because you might end up with something you like. So that's another key tip, is that if it goes wrong, don't overly worry. Just kind of go with the flow and see what you end up with, because what's happening is with each of these experiments, you'll learn something each time, even though you may make a mistake. So this time, cast shadow on the front wheel as well. Notice that one's in contact with the front wheel. The one under the rear wheel is not in contact, because the rear wheel is off the ground, front wheel is on the ground. So let's try for the third time. So rear wheel in place, incomplete, motion lines put in place. Rear triangle of the bicycle is better proportioned, and a much more considered mark to describe the shape of the seat of the bicycle this time. I decided not to include the cranks and pedals at all, just the front sprocket, so I'm not even going to worry about that, going back to the idea of leaving bits out. And now there's the front wheel, much better proportioned than before. And then just thinking now, taking a little bit of time. And there's the left foot of the rider on the axle peg. And then what to do next. There's the upper thigh, right buttock and right thigh. Lower part of the right leg and an indication of the foot. Notice again, I didn't complete the shape of the foot. A quick indication of the arch of the back, and then a line going along the spine to kind of help create that curvature. A quick couple of lines for the lower arm, a quick line for the right elbow, and a quick sweep for the shape of the head. Cast shadows in place, and then have I done enough? I think I need a little bit more. A couple of perspective lines which aren't there at all, but we're free to add to the reference, and that's that one done. So hopefully you can see that by taking different approaches to drawing the same subject or a similar subject, it can encourage us to draw very efficiently and expressively. So to summarize, I would recommend drawing as difficult a subject as you can find, and then saying to yourself, what are the 5 or 6 key shapes that I need to draw here? What are the things that really stand out, which would summarize the situation? Try using a medium like a Sharpie pen, which forces you to put down a permanent mark. And equally, that's the case with the brush and the acrylic paint. Experiment with the scale of drawing you do, and then don't worry too much. Feel free to experiment, feel free to add bits to the subject, feel free to leave lots of bits out, and then know when to stop. So the thing I'm most pleased about with this final sketch, this final brush drawing, is that I stopped when I did, and I didn't go in a fiddle, and I didn't add any extra lines. So there we go. Those are some of my key tips for learning to draw and sketch efficiently. Hope you enjoyed this video, and hope to see you next Sunday for the next episode of the Sunday Art Show. Thanks very much for watching.